This is Apropos. Donald Trump is facing perhaps the most daunting question of the war with Iran, one that could define his time in office, whether or not to put US troops on the ground in Iran. While he's insisting there are no plans to do so, experts remain concerned that if hardliners in Tehran emerge from the fighting, they'll be more motivated than ever to build nuclear weapons. Eliza Herbert takes a closer look.
And do you intend to potentially put U.S. troops or more troops in the region?
No, I'm not putting troops anywhere. If I were, I certainly wouldn't tell you.
It was a quick rebuff from Donald Trump, and one many will be taking with a grain of salt. As the US president weighs his next move in Iran, US officials have said he is seriously considering deploying thousands of troops. The sources, speaking anonymously to Reuters, claimed they would be on top of the US Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is currently en route to the region and said to be carrying more than 2,000 Marines. Securing the Strait of Hormuz is high on Trump's agenda, and while oil tankers could be escorted through the channel by air and naval forces, some troops may be needed along the Iranian shoreline. Another option reportedly being floated is to deploy soldiers to Karg Island, Iran's major oil hub in the strait, which the US targeted on March 13th. A move that would risk placing soldiers within reach of Iranian missiles and drones. One thing the Trump administration has confirmed is that the US remains committed to its objectives.
Destroy missiles, launchers, and Iran's defense industrial base so they cannot rebuild, destroy their navy, and Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
Some analysts believe Trump is also considering a commando operation to retrieve Iran's uranium, possibly even to the Isfahan site, which the US bombed in June. A dangerous operation deep into Iranian territory that would require transporting toxic and radioactive materials and somehow penetrating the bunker to retrieve fuel stored hundreds of feet below ground.
For more on what's at stake, we're joined by Michael OHanland, Director of Research in the Foreign Policy Programme at the Brookings Institution. Thanks so much, Michael, for being with us on the programme. You are an expert on US defence strategy. So what do you make of these reports that Washington is potentially considering deploying thousands of soldiers to the Middle East?
Greetings. Well, I thought your report was very good in outlining the plausible missions, basically trying to retrieve the enriched uranium or trying to prevent Iran from using its coastline near the Strait of Hormuz to deploy mines or drones against shipping, or possibly to take and control or do raids against Karg Island, the main output area for Iran's petrochemical and hydrocarbon exports. I have not heard President Trump talk in detail about any of those. So I think what we're doing, myself in my job, many other defense analysts, and you in your reporting, is simply to sketch out the plausible missions based on what we know about Iranian assets and what we've heard President Trump say about potential goals in this military operation. But I have not heard him get into any detail on what he would do with ground forces. I'm confident, however, that 2,000 Marines are not nearly enough to do anything more than occasional small raids. They cannot really hold territory. It's not enough people to do that. It's not enough people, I don't think, even to carry out a raid at Isfahan to go after the highly enriched uranium, because you would need a perimeter defense to make sure that Iran could not send forces to attack whoever was trying to get underground to go after that uranium. So we don't have enough ground forces in position yet if we were even to consider any of these options. And overall, the president's still saying that he's not considering them. So we'll just have to see.
And if these stocks aren't secured, how long would it actually take Iran to get back to a position where it would be capable of developing a nuclear weapon? Is it even possible to speculate about that at this point?
Well, it's possible to speculate as long as you don't ask me to pin down my estimate very carefully, because one possibility is that Iran can get to the roughly 900 kilograms of uranium-235 that's been enriched to 60% purity. which is getting close to bomb grade of 90%. If they could reach that, and then they could rebuild centrifuges in perhaps a secret facility that we don't know about and would not be invited to inspect, I think that in that scenario, they could potentially build a nuclear weapon within a few years. The hard part is going to be probably building the centrifuges and reconstituting a centrifuge enrichment cascade facility. If, however, Iran has to start from scratch and doesn't get access to that uranium-235 that's enriched to 60% already, then perhaps we're talking about several or many years. So, it would be pretty hard for Iran to do this, let's say, in the year 2026, unless they have capabilities we simply don't know about and never attacked, in which case it could be months. But I think more likely it's single-digit years, probably 2 to 5 years, but who knows?
And Michael, after 20 days of war, more generally, what kind of military capacity does Iran still have at this stage in terms of the state of its navy, its stockpiles of drones and missiles? The US says it's carried out nearly 8,000 strikes on Iran over the past 3 weeks.
Well, right. I think you're correct to try to break it down category by category. If we look at Iran's nuclear facilities, as you and I were just discussing, they've been largely compromised. If we look at Iran's missile launching capability, it appears to have been reduced by 90% or more, at least for the moment. If we look at Iran's large surface ship navy, I think it's been very badly damaged. But if we look at Iran's ability to still suppress its own population, I don't think that's been reduced very much at all. And if we look at Iran's ability to lay mines or to use unmanned underwater or surface vessels in the Persian Gulf and near the Strait of Hormuz in particular, I'm just guessing, but perhaps that's been reduced by 50%, 30%, something in that broad range, but nowhere near 90 to 100%. And therefore, I believe that threat is potent. Now, I suppose we could keep doing these air strikes for several more weeks in the hope that even the smaller boats and even the smaller mines would ultimately be destroyed and the Strait of Hormuz could be reopened without ever having to put any American ground troops into Iran along the coastline. But I think that is a pretty optimistic assessment, and it would still take, I think, several more weeks of bombardment to achieve that objective, even if things were going as well as we possibly hoped.
And Michael, Donald Trump this week calling repeatedly for NATO allies to get involved to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. Today, we heard from 6 major international powers, including France, saying that they would get involved to some degree. We don't have much detail on what exactly that means. What do you think these allies have in mind?
Well, first of all, I don't blame allies for wanting a little bit of time to think this through. After all, they were not consulted when the United States initiated hostilities or even when it began to consider the use of force against Iran. And so I think it's a little bit presumptuous of the United States to expect that France, Britain, other European or Japanese or Korean allies would quickly want to get involved. I think they need some time to think through their options. You deserve time to think through your options. Everybody inside of NATO is still a sovereign country, and this is not NATO's area of geographic focus anyway. So I'm encouraged to hear that allies are not simply slamming the door. That's, I think, a positive development, because I worry that if the allies simply said categorically no to Mr. Trump, that could put the future of the alliance at risk, in addition to putting the future of Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz oil shipping and gas shipping at further risk, because we do need the help if we're ever going to really make this problem get resolved. So I don't know what it means. My guess is European friends don't yet know what it means. They're giving a lukewarm answer that's not meant to shut the door on further consultation, but they've got to see where this goes over the next few days before deciding to put their own forces at jeopardy in helping the United States.
And Donald Trump as well, floating the idea that he might actually simply leave the Strait of Hormuz, saying that the US doesn't actually need it and leave it up to NATO allies, up to the Europeans to sort out the problems there that are, as you say, not of Europe's making. Do you think that's an empty threat on the part of the US president, or is it possible that he might just pull out and leave the mess that he's created behind?
Well, it's a good question. As we all are aware, global markets for oil and gas are fungible, which means that it doesn't really matter who produces the oil and gas. If there's a shortage in global supply, prices will go up everywhere, including in the United States. And that's during a year when Mr. Trump does not want to lose the Congress, with midterm elections now only 8 months away. So I think it's unlikely to be a serious threat. On the other hand, it's true that European countries have better and more numerous minesweepers than the United States. So if we ever got to a point where we could collectively or in various, coalitions of the willing, start cleaning up the Strait of Hormuz, I think Europe would have more capability to do that than the United States, because we've always emphasized so-called blue water navies to get across the Atlantic or get across the Pacific in our military operations. And going back to the Cold War, it was Europeans who were primarily going to be responsible for security near their own coastline. So in that sense, there could be a natural division of labor. And even though Mr. Trump's threat is not completely logical or compelling, we may wind up seeing the Europeans do more if we can ever get to a place where such an operation would be relatively safe.
And Michael, regardless of how or when all of this ends, do you think that Iran is going to end up posing an enduring threat? At this stage, is a diplomatic solution possible?
I think there will be elements of diplomacy, but we will not get to a perfect peace. So we may get to a point where Iran's role in the region is less nefarious. Maybe we get to a nuclear deal with inspections that makes Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon not realistic on any timeline. And going back to our earlier discussion, maybe we can get a deal on that eventually. But my sense right now is that Iran's in the mood for revenge because its leadership has seen its friends and family killed by the Israeli airstrikes in particular. And of course, this regime has built its whole existence and its whole legitimacy on the idea of opposition to the United States, opposition to Israel, opposition even to moderate Arab states in the broader Middle East. And that's been true now for 47 years. So this is a regime that thrives on violence and grievance and revenge. And I'm afraid we're likely to see some more of that for a while before any reduction.
And Michael, just finally, what did you make of Benjamin Netanyahu's comments a little earlier this evening when he said that Israel did not drag the United States into this war?
Well, overall, Prime Minister Netanyahu is very happy that he has convinced President Trump that the United States should be Israel's partner in this operation. And I think for 20-some years, the United States and European friends have worried about the possible acquisition of an Iranian nuclear weapon. So that's a concern that we all share, separate from whatever Israel's assessment may be. Of course, part of why we worry about an Iranian nuclear weapon is because such a weapon, if ever developed, might be used against Israel, but it also could be used against the United States. And Israel has attacked Iran has attacked American interests many times in the broader Middle East, going back to the 1980s. So we do have independent, separate reasons of our own to want to see Iran weakened. So in that limited sense, Prime Minister Netanyahu is correct that we made our own decisions about when to use force. But Israel, of course, created the conditions that made the attack appealing last June and again this winter. So I think it's been an interactive, collaborative effort between the Israeli and American governments.
Michael, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for that analysis, though. That's Michael OHanland, Director of Research in the Foreign Policy Programme at the Brookings Institute. Thanks so much. That is it.